Hello and welcome back to the podcast. It is always up to speed with Formula One. Mark Daly, Mark Hamilton, and Vincenzo Landino here on the eve of what is spring break here in beautiful British Columbia, BC. Hey, Vincenzo, is it spring break down there in your neck of the woods?
Some universities have this week off, and I think there's maybe official spring break for like secondary school or high school uh, next week or a couple weeks, something like that. So it's like right around this time. I never really pay
Yeah.
attention.
I'm very, yeah, well, neither do I because I don't get
Past
spring
the
break
age of
off
spring
anyways.
break, right?
Exactly, past the age of spring break, but that means that I got to like try and keep my kids amused for the next 2 weeks and somehow still earn a living. So it's going to be interesting. But Mr. Hamilton, how's it going? You've got a big smile on there. The things must be going good in the Hamilton household.
Yeah, I mean, everything is going great. You and I had some big news earlier today that mask restrictions and some of the final
Yeah.
COVID protocols are wrapping up in British Columbia, which is a big, big, big change for us, which is pretty exciting. Apple dropped some exciting products this week, and of course, Drive to Survive drops tonight, tomorrow, and we're in the middle of the final round of winter testing. There's a lot of really exciting stuff going on, my friend.
Oh, totally. And I mean, yeah, it's funny too that it seems like we're finally getting back to normal here in BC, but I guess better late than never. But we're not here to complain about what's happening here at home. We're here to talk about what's happening in Formula One. And boy, there's been a ton of things going on. I mean, by the time that most of you guys are listening to this, I mean, it's late Thursday night here. By the time this drops, it'll be Friday morning. And I know you guys are going to listen to this first before you reach for your tablets, your phones, or go to your TVs. And you guys could even keep a straight face on this one. But we all know that they're coming here first before they go to watch season 4 of Drive to Survive. Vincenzo, any expectations on this one?
I, I think it's gonna be absolutely crazy. The last two episodes are gonna be it's gonna be nuts. And Mark talked about it a little earlier tonight on a Spaces. We did a quick Twitter Spaces, and I think we're gonna end up getting a lot of kind of bringing back those drama from the end of December, from the middle of December is gonna come back. But it'll be interesting to see how folks react to what they saw on screen because I believe that last season was really the first season where a lot of folks that were watching Drive to Survive in previous seasons, the first two seasons, actually went and watched the third season and the actual race season. So
Yeah.
I want to see if they piece things together like, that's not accurate, or this, that wasn't said that way. Like, will there be a little bit more critical thinking involved in the viewer at this point? So I'm really curious to see how they hype up the drama because last season, I mean, did not need dramatization, right? Like it
No.
was crazy. So I'm just gonna that's what I'm curious to see. I I think by the time I'm done recording this podcast, I might only have to wait like a half an hour to watch the first episode. So
There you go.
Vincenzo, Haley, when we were in the Spaces chat tonight, too, one of the things that we were talking about was the fact that, hey, could they have released this a week early? Did they release it early enough? There's a lot going on. But one of the things that we were talking about, and Vincenzo was as equally surprised as I was, is they shared screener copies of the first 8 episodes with a number of different media outlets. And you can go online, you can go to a number of different sources right now and get a pretty robust summary of what's happening in episodes 1 through 8 already. And it was a bit of a surprise. And Vincenzo, I'm dying to hear your thoughts on this as well. But we know that 9 and 10 have not been viewed by anybody. And it's either because one, they're not done and they're still cutting them, or two, Netflix intentionally didn't want to release the content of those because they want to build up some anticipation. But Vincenzo, were you as surprised as I was that one, they released the screeners without an embargo, and two, that there's such detailed summaries of the episodes days or weeks before anyone can even see it?
yeah, I think I'm less surprised they released it or that they allowed some people to see it. Pretty standard stuff in media, movies. You get permit. Here's the thing: it's becoming such a big deal at this point. Drive to Survive and what it's doing for Netflix, what it's doing for Formula One, that you have to treat it like a movie premiere, right? Or this big premiere, so that you have to make a big deal about it. I'm really, really shocked as to the lack of embargo on people talking about it. I mean, like there's a channel I will not name, but they did pretty robust breakdowns to the point where you're almost like, does that spoil the episode for you? Maybe not, because there's still things that go on that you want to watch anyway. You're probably going to watch it anyway. But yeah, I don't know. It kind of gave me a weird feeling because, where did that directive, who made that decision? Was that a
Yeah.
Netflix decision? Was that a Formula One decision? Conspiracy theory would take me into this whole Formula One is trying to detract from whatever is happening and going around, right? The start of the season. So let's put out something that makes people pay attention to somewhere else, right? I don't necessarily believe that, but like there's always that conspiracy theory in my head. Yeah, lack of embargo is just weird. Like, why wouldn't you want to be the first one to release all of the information? Like, if you're Netflix, if you're Formula One, if you're box to box, I mean, box to box probably didn't have a say on the distribution aspect. So if you're Netflix,
Probably,
why, why not?
Yeah.
So yeah, it's strange, very strange. But who knows? We'll see. Like, it could be all smoke and mirrors too. Like, we really don't know. Are they telling the truth? Like, I don't know.
Yeah, we're if somebody's come up with like these, like you guys say, these very detailed summaries, we have to assume that that's what it is. I mean, it probably is, and I mean, generally, I mean, we're all gonna for all of us that sat through all 22 races or whatever it was that we had last year, we kind of know where that arc goes, and we know where how that story ends. But it's interesting, just the way that you guys were speculating. I think Hamilton just mentioned it, that there was nothing on episodes 9 and 10, which is obviously the climax of the season there.
Yep.
And obviously what happened in Yas and whatever happened afterwards. So that's a great question. Did they, is that locked away in a vault somewhere that nobody has access to, or is it possible, like Mark said, that they're not done, which would not be unheard of. I mean, back in the old day, if you had your favorite show, you knew you were getting, say, 20 episodes a year or something like that, and it aired every night or every Tuesday night at 9 p.m. or something like that. The streaming world's a little bit different, but you see it now with some series that they'll drop either the entire season or they'll drop the first, say, 4 episodes or something, and then subsequently they release consequent episodes or consecutive episodes a week later or something like that, till you get all 8 or 10 or whatever it is like this. But and I don't have anything to the contrary. I'm just purely speculating here. I think that they're just kind of playing it, close to their chest, and releasing it to these preferred media partners and let them see whatever it is and hype it up or disclose whatever they want and maybe build a bit of excitement about it. I see some nodding heads here and some thoughtful faces. Who wants to take that one first? Vincenzo, Hamilton, Mark? Okay, go ahead, Hamilton.
I'm happy to go. So if you remember 2 years ago, and I think we remember all the darkest days, the early wave of the pandemic when we were all locked in our houses for 2 months, we were all, I don't want to say subjected because it was really good, but we all got to go on the Last Dance journey, and they were releasing 2 episodes every week. And I remember at the time listening to a podcast that was very explicit about the fact that in some instances, they were still slicing and cutting together episodes hours before they hit streaming platforms, hours before they hit broadcast. And, Micah made a really great point.
And that was Michael Jordan making a lot of those calls.
Yeah.
That was
really?
Jordan himself he was influencing a lot of the direction right down to the end because there were certain things he didn't want. So anyway, I just wanted to interject that because
that's great insight. Yeah.
That's what happens when you have stakeholders. That's what you have, what happens when you have F1 drivers, all these people you have to kind of navigate, the politics you have to consider. And yeah, Jordan literally was making certain decisions and certain calls on what he wanted in episodes and what he didn't. So anyway,
that's amazing.
Well, of course. And, I'll just finish that thought. Like Micah made a great point tonight because his brother's in the film and production industry, that these things go down to the wire. Like he made a great point during the Spaces chat tonight that the season only ended, January, February, March, less than 3 months ago. Less than 3 months ago, the season wrapped. Like that's not a lot of time to put together a 10-story, 10-hour mini docu-series and try to, and Vincenzo, you make such a great point that when you're piecing these together, it's not like one person sits in the room with all the footage and has total say over it. Like they've got to satisfy dozens of stakeholders, right? Like they've got to pass this through Liberty and the FIA and through the individual teams and the drivers and the driver managers. In the case of The Last Dance, the only reason that footage ever saw the light of day was because Michael Jordan gave the green light. Like that footage, all of that cinematic 16 and 35 millimeter film, that was sitting in a vault for 20 years because Michael Jordan didn't give anyone the green light. So yeah, you're absolutely right that he was a big part of that production process.
Yeah, it's going to be fun. Looking forward to it, seeing it come out finally. It's almost become, well, I mean, it has pretty much become like an annual milestone that that first or
Yeah.
second week in March that the latest season, the latest drop of Drive to Survive is coming out. You mark your
Daily,
calendars accordingly.
one thing before we move on, because we forgot it last week and shame on all of us.
Oh, good
Super
man. I know.
excitedly,
Yeah.
last week we launched the Scuderia F1 Pod Cross featuring collaboration F1 Fantasy Super League with Vincenzo Landino, and we forgot to talk about it on the podcast. It's been the most requested thing in the entire ecosystem of this podcast for a year, and we forgot to talk about it. And the good news is, as we speak, we should be crossing the 1,700 entry mark, which is
Wild.
phenomenal. So
That's awesome.
we are desperately trying to arrange some prizes. And I know Vincenzo indicated on a tweet he posted yesterday that I will be bankrolling that, but we promise we'll come
And
up
so
with
you
some
should.
prizes. We have
Correct.
a few
You
months
should.
to make this happen. But the last day to join is March 18th. So Daily, I'm looking at you. When you get home this weekend from your conference, you got to join. You can have 3 teams. It's going to be a lot of fun, everybody.
That's going to be good fun. Yeah, that's awesome. I mean, the way that it's really sort of taken off with zero promotion from the guys that are actually running this thing. So, but good for you for remembering. Anyways, let's steer it back to the track here before we go into the first break in a couple of minutes. And I guess this is news that isn't really news, but Haas announced a couple of days ago this week that they've cut ties with Nikita Mazepin, and he's not going to be driving for them this week. So, I mean, what with everything that else has been happening and just the general boycott and distancing, to put it mildly, of anything Russian in the past couple of weeks, you could see this one coming a mile away. It was just a question of when and not if. But I guess for me, and I'm sure a lot of other people out there with some very young, talented drivers out there, I mean, like Nick de Vries, Oscar Piastri, etc., I have to admit that I was more than let's just say I was shocked that they decided to go with the known quantity in Kevin Magnussen, who drove for them for several years. Didn't drive last year, of course, but he's back in the seat beside Mick Schumacher for this year. Vincenzo, your thoughts on first of all? Well, I mean, obviously Mazepin wasn't the surprise, but the whole K-Mag thing. What did you make of that?
Less so initially shot like, oh wow, K-Mag wasn't really somebody we were talking about. As I processed and gathered some information, I think that it's the right choice. Magnussen's an aggressive driver. He's quick. He has the ability to push Schumacher, whereas a Giovinazzi, Fittipaldi, they're like, what do they have to offer right now? Giovinazzi, he's been in Formula One, didn't prove enough. Fittipaldi is still young, hasn't had like a ton of chances to prove himself anywhere. But is he the one that's going to push Mick? No. I know there was talk of Hulkenberg. I don't know if that was really in the cards to work out. So I think K-Mag's been on the team before, so it's not it wasn't like, oh, we went and got somebody that we've never dealt with. I had said this earlier this week that I believe, based on some information that I have, that Ferrari actually pushed for a driver like Magnussen to push and to help kind of give Mick a little bit of competition because they want to see him grow. He's not going to grow with anyone else. And regardless of if Ferrari actually did that, I think that's the move for Haas. Like Schumacher's the guy for whatever foreseeable future, but you got to give him a teammate that can actually kind of push and go back and forth. Competition amongst the teammates, it helps every other team. Look at all the other teams out there that actually have 2 decent drivers. They can push each other. And so Mick needed that, right? Mazepin wasn't it. Mazepin finished 21st in a 20 driver field. Like, that's kind of crazy. So yeah, I like K-Mag. I like him. I like him back in Formula One. I think is a great energy to be back in the sport, and I think he's going to be able to. He's going to kind of get full reign of driving the hell out of that car. Drive as fast as you can, do whatever. I mean, it's almost like you came into this thing last minute. Whatever. We're a bottom of the pack type team. Like, go for it.
Yeah.
Kind of like the no pressure situation he's in, and hopefully that can kind of push and help Mick along as well.
Yeah.
I agree.
Okay, well,
with,
Mark, just hang on a second. If you can just park it there. I want to just take a quick break, and then when we come back, I'll let you run with it because there's a couple of different, I want to pitch a couple of different questions to you on the whole K-Mag back to Haas. I'd be interested to get your take on that. So we'll do that in just a moment, so don't go away. We'll just break for a short message from our sponsors. All right, welcome back to the show. You're listening to Scuderia F1 with Mark, and not Mark, and the not Mark is obviously Vincenzo. Anyways, before the break there, we were talking about, the latest thing we were talking about was the whole, sacking, if you want to call it that, of Nikita Mazepin, and then bringing Kevin Magnussen back into the team. And Vincenzo, you made a good point there about bringing a known quantity like K-Mag back into the team at basically the 11th hour right before the last winter test, and then the first race of the year coming up pretty quick. But Marco, I want you to take that a little bit further. I mean, Vincenzo brought it up and said that they need an experienced driver or somebody to push Mick Schumacher. But also, what do you? Well, I want to hear your thoughts on that. But also, what about your thoughts about bringing a guy like Kevin Magnussen, who's been with the team before, knows everybody there, and is going to bring I wouldn't say a level of expertise, but obviously relationships that he has with people within the team. Do you think that there's maybe a bit of I wouldn't say an X factor, but definitely a dynamic there that will help them in developing and maybe bringing this new car along? What are your thoughts on that?
I think Vincenzo made a tremendous point, and I think history will tell us that 2020 was a lost year for Mick Schumacher. He was in an obsolete dud of a car that had been completely written off the year before, and he was competing against a teammate that had no business being in Formula One. So I don't know how much he learned. I don't know how much he grew last year, and I think Vincenzo nailed it, that having somebody like Magnussen in the car next to him is going to be instrumental for his development. But I think what this is really telling is, you look at the situation, right? Like, we go back to 2020 and Grosjean and Magnussen are unceremoniously dismissed from this team. And we now know it was because they wanted to bring in Mick because he's got the Ferrari ties, the Ferrari linkage, and there's a tie between Haas and Ferrari, between the Scuderia. And they also brought in a young driver in Mazepin who was clearly a paid driver. So you look at this in isolation now. You had Magnussen, who was a qualified driver then and probably should have retained a seat, but he lost it to an inferior driver who was bringing funding through his dad's business. That young driver is now gone. The funding's gone, and you've now immediately reverted to the driver who was replaced by Mazepin. So to me, this is a troubling situation because from Haas's perspective, Gene Haas made a conscious decision here that the competitiveness of the team and the integrity of the team, when you consider the linkages that they ultimately had with a Russian oligarch, were less important than having a pay driver. That if competitiveness and growing the brand and integrity were really important to Gene Haas, why did you not just keep Kevin Magnussen? Because remember, they've now committed to a multi-year deal with Kevin Magnussen, right? The young Danish driver now gets a multi-year deal. So I think it's really, it doesn't reflect well on Gene Haas, and it doesn't necessarily reflect well on the decision makers here. And then I think the other thing we have to consider, and we always caution everyone that's listening at home with the fact that, hey, look, we all know that this is happening as a ripple effect of the fact that Russia invaded Ukraine and has initiated a devastating tragedy of a war. And the life of a single person in that country is more important than everything we're talking about here. But when we were in the Spaces session earlier tonight, somebody had made a really interesting comment that I wrote down, which is, hey, live by the oligarch, die by the oligarch. And it's funny, and somebody else had made a comment as well, that it took a war for all of us to really start digging into the fact that Gene Haas had linked up with somebody like Dmitry Mazepin, who has such close ties to the president of Russia, right? Like, we're talking about a guy who had an in-person physical meeting with Vladimir Putin the day after the invasion began to have an update on how the invasion was going. It's appalling. So I think it's a good move away. And I think the resounding sentiment in Vincenzo, I don't know if you agree, but online today in Spaces on Twitter, the general consensus is that all of a sudden Haas is a lot more likable as a team than they were 3 or 4 days ago.
Yeah. I, I see that. I think it's, rightfully so. Um, they still have the problem of not having many sponsors on that car,
Mhm.
meaning that there's a funding there's going to be a funding gap at some point unless Gene Haas suddenly has unlimited funds. Um, not that that has anything to do necessarily with what you just said, Mark. I think that that is just something to consider. Likable isn't always the business decision, right? I'm not saying that they should have entered into an agreement with an oligarch, but I think when you're pushed into situations, I can see why decisions might have been made. Um, it does. I think it just reflects super poorly on Gene Haas in general, just because if that's the way you're running the team, like now you're going back to Magnussen, you've got to give him a multi-year deal because you look like an idiot that you let him go and now you're taking him back. Um, it just poorly run, like we see this in other sports too. You could look at this across the board. The poorly run teams, the ones that are at the bottom year in and year out, are the ones that make these types of moves. You don't see a Ferrari making these types of moves, a Mercedes, a Red Bull. Like they're not making these kind of like strange deals. And so like that's why the winners continue to kind of rise to the top, the cream rises to the top, and the crap is always at the back of the pack. I mean, like there's no other way to look at it. But yeah, I'd like to see that team actually be run properly.
Andre made a good comment today, and Daly, you're a big NFL guy, but he made a comment that Haas are very much the New York Jets of Formula One, and you got to look at the last couple of years, right? Like I can't wait for the Elizabeth Blackstock book because she's writing the book about that marriage, that ill-fated marriage between Rich Energy and Haas. Like I cannot wait to read that book and understand who the hell did the due diligence at Haas to think it was okay to sign this like title sponsor deal with a
Yeah.
Phantom energy drinks producer. But from your perspective, do you agree with that analogy, that NFL analogy, Mark?
Yeah, totally. Vincenzo, you were going to say something. Go for it.
No, I was just going to say that if this opens, because politics and F1, business and money of F1 is a very shady area. Like that's
Sure.
that's
Yeah.
The history
it's
of the
world,
sport.
correct. And it's the world I try to explore, but it's also very, very closed off, more so than the rest of the sport. And let's just face it, like my own Scuderia Ferrari had Mission Winnow. Like, what was that? Husky chocolate. I'm McLaren. Like, there's all these things we could talk about. If this whole ordeal with Uralkali causes enough, I guess, uproar or enough of, hey, you know what? We may want to do a little bit more due diligence because we don't want to turn into that. Then that's a good thing. So if there's something they can take from that situation,
agree, man. Great call.
across the sport, I don't know if I actually don't know the answer to this. Maybe you guys do, but is there some sort of like, in order for you to sign a sponsor, there's like some sort of regulation it passes through, or can you pretty much sign anybody?
Not at all.
Well, I mean, you
that's a
had
great
that.
question.
Yeah.
There's nothing.
I was going to say there
Right.
was that thing there last end of last year in the fall when Mercedes hooked up with, was it Kingsgate or something, that they were
Yeah.
the ones with that tower in London
The
that burnt
Greenfell
down.
Tower.
And I mean that was just like a PR nightmare for Mercedes, who, I mean, let's face it, those guys never put a foot wrong on or off the track, and that one just, I mean, at the very, very best, that just seemed like it was tone deaf. I mean, in the worst of light, it was just callous and just cold. But I mean, it was just not a good look for that team. So I think we can draw conclusions that it's almost that anybody that sort of ponies up, a fair amount of cash can put their sponsorship on the car. So,
Which is a shame because
yeah,
brand integrity is something that, like in the NFL, teams are very aware of. The shield. They talk about the shield all the time, meaning the NFL crest, the
sure,
shield.
yep,
It's always like that's what's most important. The shield first, brand integrity first, reputation first.
yeah.
A global brand like Formula One, how do you ensure, posturing that you are this elite brand is lip service compared to what like you actually need to do when it comes to who's representing you, where's the money coming from in the sport. And in a day and age where social media is around and people can get information out immediately, it you would be hard pressed to find anybody that wouldn't want to make the sport better. But it's got to be done right, all the way down to that, like the money that's coming in, and that trickles down. So I think if this opens up people's minds to, we've got to do a little bit more research. We've got to understand a little bit more of what's going on. You got to go 3 steps deeper than you thought originally you needed to. Then it's a good thing. Trying to
Yeah.
take a little silver lining, hopefully.
Vincenzo, you've opened my mind and my eyes to the idea that Formula One should be governing the sponsors that get put on those cars, right? Like you look at the NBA, and we could talk about this topic forever, and I know we got to move on, but if you look at the NBA signs off every sponsor that's associated with every team. And in the NBA, you guys might not know this, but the teams don't actually own their logo or their name. They license them from the league office itself. So it's crazy. A couple of other points real quick. I know we got to move on. Mazepin and his father have officially been sanctioned by the EU. And this one, Vincenzo, Daly, I know you're a huge Ferrari fan as well. Ferrari has donated 1 million euros to support Ukrainians in need across Europe.
Yeah, that's
Grande
great.
ragazzi.
Yeah. Yeah, I had another one I just wanted to bring up before we move on to the next one. I mean, there's tons of other stuff here, so I don't want to dwell on it too long. But Nikita Mazepin has announced the formation of a foundation to support athletes that have been excluded from sport due to political reasons. That's going to be funded by Uralkali money that was destined to go to Haas sponsorship this year. I mean, I can
So
Tone deaf, my friend.
Yeah, I know. Need we say more? Probably not.
It's so funny. You're reading that story as a newscaster and you can't even keep a straight face. It's just such an absurd initiative. And we are very human on the show, but that is just so misguided and so tone deaf.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think none of us would be cynical if this is something he'd started 2 years ago for maybe other people in other situations, but to come 2 weeks after, like, the Russian invasion of Ukraine, and then his sacking from Haas, and then Uralkali being removed as head sponsor and stuff like that. I mean, the timing is, yeah, well. What more can we say? Anyways, let's move on to the next story, and this is sort of kind of related, and this kind of goes back to one of I wouldn't say one of our, well, I guess it is kind of one of our favorite topics. We've talked about it quite a bit over the last several months, and so I'm going to go back and talk about Michael Andretti and his bid to try and start a new Formula One team. And he said he's awaiting a decision on his proposed F1 team. So perhaps maybe he found that $1 billion that Toto told him to bring if he wants to play at the F1 table.
I think Andretti, I'm reading some of the comments that are popping through on the live stream. And it is, what's interesting about, I don't know if you guys had seen, but Andretti they have not released who they are, but he has sponsors, American money. I find it fascinating that Haas, the American team, someone mentioned it in the chat. They're not able to really nail down any American sponsors. I think Andretti's going to have no problem getting money, sponsors, good sponsors. Right? We're talking about what we were just talking about, integrity of sponsors. I think they'll be able to get pretty much anybody, the pick of the litter, and
Totally
they
agree.
credit the growth of the sport. The article that we linked in our show notes is credited to the growth of the sport and how much it's growing here in the U.S. As to how easy it's been for them, to get these sponsors. He even said that Andretti said that his investors think that when you look at sports, there's not a lot of franchises out there in terms of opportunity, which has made trying to get involved in Formula One more attractive. So there's huge opportunity.
Totally. Well, think about it this way. I mean, you might not know a lot about motorsports, but if you know a little bit about sports, there's instant name recognition when you hear Andretti. I mean, it's not just a name, it's almost a brand in its own right. And I mean, if
Well,
you
Mario
hear that,
Andretti was just saying that. Like, if you
yeah,
drive fast, people are like, "Oh, what do you think? You're Mario Andretti?" People don't even know
exactly.
motorsport, like you said. So yeah,
Exactly. Exactly. I mean, he's like a household name, right? Everybody
yep.
knows the name Mario Andretti, right? So I mean, if there's like an Andretti backed proposal to get a team into Formula One, if they have money, you know, you would have to think, and just based on this, you know, the way that these guys race, the way that they do business, that they're going to approach it and do it the right way. I mean, it just seems completely illogical to me that people wouldn't be lining up to sponsor that team.
And they have a plan in place, according to the indie broadcast clip that I had heard a week ago. They've got a plan in place, F2, F3. So like they want a whole proper, system. They're not just trying to jump in the glory of F1. Like they want everything. They want to do it right.
Yeah.
So I think that's something. If the FIA doesn't approve this, I'm not sure what they're looking for anymore.
I
Honestly.
just,
Well,
I just,
exactly.
I just think, man, like I agree with you, and I've really warmed, and I'm now really hot on the idea of Andretti coming in. I don't think it needs to be a new team. Like I feel like, and you and I talked about this earlier on the Spaces chat. Like, what is Gene Haas's end goal with that team? Is it to build it into a winner? Clearly not. Is it to develop American talent? Clearly not. He's had it for 6 years and he's done nothing. If it's
Yeah.
to allow it to appreciate as an asset and sell it now. It's never been worth more. Like for me, if I'm fundamentally broken team on the grid. And again, this isn't a shot at any of the, I'm assuming, amazing people working at that team and in the factory, because I'm sure there's some exceptional people. But from an ownership perspective, that team is broken. And if I'm
Mhm.
Formula One, if I'm the FIA, I need to fix that before I allow any other
Mhm.
teams on the grid, because I think Andretti could offer some real value. And Vincenzo, you're right. Like, he would offer premium sponsors potentially. We're talking about Pepsi, we're talking about Coke, we're talking about
Yeah.
large software providers.
Totally,
And
right?
Well, he's
it
already
just
got
speaks to how
partners.
toxic Haas is. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
He's already got partners across other teams. Not that Haas doesn't, but Andretti already has partners that are willing. They've come out and said they're ready to go. In fact, one of Andretti's biggest sponsors, I think it's called, Gainsbridge, is they're partnered with the Miami GP. They're a recent
Oh, there you
partner of
go.
the Miami GP. So there's already like they're already getting themselves in there, because it's going to be a lot harder for the FIA and for Formula One to say no when you've got pressure. Like, you've already got money in the sport. Hey, we're already sponsoring this. We are going to sponsor this team, but you need to have this team. Like, there's going to be pressure at some point for them to make that move. And Mark, Daly, to your point before about how you said, you don't necessarily need to be a person that knows motorsport to understand the value of this. I'll even venture to say you don't have to know motorsport at all. You don't even have to know Mario Andretti's name. You just need to understand media. Just look at the
Mhm.
growth of the media properties and the assets that are now in front of us with, I know I'm going to say Drive to Survive, but everything that Formula One is doing, social,
Sure.
digital content, that alone is worth it. So people will be exploring, and I say people, brands will be exploring this for sure, without a doubt. And especially if they promise American drivers, it's an absolute home run.
I'm still hoping that we'll see Wonder Bread on the side of a Formula One car before it's
Hey,
all
why
over.
not?
He
That's
can dig me.
great.
Hey, I mean, if they're willing to sponsor Ricky Bobby, you know that they're looking at the big time. Anyways, guys,
Shake and
joking
bake.
aside, I had to go there. I'm sorry. Anyways, let's take a quick break. We'll be back in just a moment, so don't go away. Okay, everybody, welcome back to the show, and special shout out to everybody in the live stream tonight on YouTube. It's just a lot of activity in there. Loving it. We'll have to make sure that we keep following up with some of these the comments out that people are throwing in there. So another big piece of news is Formula One's partnered with Lenovo, and they're going to be bringing their cutting edge technology to Formula One's operations. Mark, do you want to talk about this one?
No, but I think Vincenzo can probably add some real value to that.
Oh, sorry. I thought this
Vincenzo,
was one of your stories.
Vincenzo, all you, my friend.
No, Lenovo is an absolute leading advanced technology or next generation technology company. For folks that don't know Lenovo, if you remember the IBM ThinkPad,
Yeah.
Lenovo bought that out. So Lenovo owns that piece of it. Lenovo is also what a lot of people don't know. They're like the 5th largest smartphone manufacturer in the world.
I did not know that.
Huge presence in China. So those numbers obviously create that, but they do have a huge presence. I know they're officially a Chinese company, Beijing, Hong Kong headquarters, but they have a headquarters in North Carolina. And they are partnering with F1. Now, in the press release, the big thing they focused on was data collection, which, let's not be scared of that. There's nothing wrong with collecting data, but also improving fan experience. Lenovo's really heavy into AR, VR hardware. So people can get excited about this because when you think about virtual experiences, augmented and virtual realities, Lenovo is an absolute leader in that space. And the technologies that they're, bringing to market will now be brought, hopefully, to Formula One. And so by being able to take the data and take the hardware that they already know and are creating, the idea is that they can help create these fan experiences both on location and off location. I don't know. This is I have no idea, but do you guys remember during COVID 2020 we had remember watching
recall
games?
COVID, yes.
Remember watching games and you'd see in some stadiums they would put people's faces.
Yeah.
They'd cut
Oh
out.
yeah.
So I would love to see, because here's the thing, right? We all talk about accessibility in Formula One in terms of, price point, people actually physically being able to travel to races. There's a lot more people that watch the sport than can ever actually go to a track.
Yeah.
If we can get the right type of augmented or virtual reality experiences created for fans to give them an on-track type experience without having to leave their home. Again, I'm not saying that's the direction they're going. I have zero clue. It's just I'm inferring that based on certain things I'm reading. That would be really cool, and that could really help the fan experience. If you think about Formula One, there's so much kind of interactivity, driving the car, taking off the wheel nut, all that kind of stuff. You could create virtual experiences for people. Not everyone
totally
has the money to do, these paddock passes or whatever, these high-end experiences that allow you to do some things. Not everyone's going to get access to that. But if you open up that access in a virtual or augmented way, I think that could be pretty cool. And so that's where I see Lenovo maybe playing. Maybe it's not this year or next year, but if it's a partnership they continue cultivating, I think that's something they can take into the future.
Oh, totally. I mean, it's an untapped area that they could really do something with. I mean, case in point, a couple of years ago, one of the things we gave my son for his birthday is one of those little VR headsets that you can put your iPhone into. And I mean, you can just go onto YouTube and we love we're av geeks, right? We love aircraft and jets and stuff like that. And you can go up and look at any sort of videos on the Blue Angels. You get the VR ones, and you put it on there. You look around, and it's a totally different experience than just watching a couple of the Blue Angels flying around just on the screen. But when you can look around and see the look or the view that the pilot's getting out of the cockpit, I mean, that's a totally different thing. And just you brought up some great examples, Vincenzo, of some different things that they could do with VR. I mean, it'd be amazing. Could you imagine you have a VR camera of on the helmet of one of the mechanics doing a wheel change in a pit stop, or in the cockpit of the car? I mean, there's sky's the limit. I mean, we've just kind of thrown a couple of examples out there right off the top of our head, but I mean, if you're in that world and you've got the creativity and the hardware and the software to do it, I mean, that could be that could be a whole game changer there.
I think it's an absolutely incredible way to enjoy the sport.
Yeah.
You have that. The thing is, it's already there, right? We already have in cockpit cameras. You already have all of this. It's already set up.
Yeah.
It's not difficult. Let me rephrase that. It's not, it shouldn't be as difficult for these technology companies to kind of just deliver them in a different way for people.
Mhm.
And it's funny, some people in the chat are saying that, well, Lenovo is just going to raise brand awareness by throwing their logos on laptops. I
Maybe.
mean, maybe, but this is what I think could happen based on the, you know, who they're dealing with. And so like, it'd be really cool to be able to take a chance, and do something that actually enriches fan experience.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I'm sure you guys will agree with me that watching Formula One at home on TV and watching the race at the track is completely a different experience. I enjoy watching it live, and I enjoy it at home watching it on my TV and having all the cool things available to watch it. But it's almost a completely different thing than, say, going down
Oh
to
yeah.
watching a football game or a basketball game or even a baseball game. I mean, it's different live than it is at home, but it's not such a contrast to going down to watch an NFL game. I mean, you miss out on some of the replays and things like that, but whatever. It's not as a huge difference in your fan experience watching at home as it is at the stadium. It just, for me, it's almost better, the in-person thing, whereas I enjoy both, like watching live at the track and at home, but for different reasons. What do you think, Mark?
Yeah, I completely agree. I gotta say though that broadcasters can still do a lot within the constraints of what they're doing today. So I can't add any analysis to what Vincenzo added with respect to Lenovo. That's expert professional analysis, and I was just sitting
Yeah.
back taking notes. I'm excited for a future where we can interact and experience the sport in a different way, because I think you both make a great point that this is a global sport and most people don't live within driving distance of a Formula One track. Like for most of us, for you and me daily, like we got to fly 6 hours to Montreal, 2 hours to Tech, or 2 hours to Dallas, and then drive 2 hours to Austin. Like it's not an easy thing for a lot of people to do, but I think there's ways they can improve the experience for people at home. And maybe it's augmented reality, maybe it's virtual reality, or maybe it's just about making the broadcast available in 4K in North America, because we in North America still can't see the races in 4K, for crying out loud. But I think you're right that there's a lot more they can do with such an exciting product. And there's a couple of stories we tagged on at the very end here indicating that, hey, during the Bahrain winter testing, Formula One's experimenting with a couple of different things. One, they're getting drones in the air. So we're going to start getting drone footage during the testing session. So that's pretty cool. Maybe that adds to the races and free practice and qualifying. But they're also going all in on the helmet camera. So we saw a little bit of that last year, and a lot of us got really excited. They've got it on 4 drivers, or they had helmet cameras on 4 different drivers today, which is pretty cool. But imagine that, to your point about the augmented reality or the virtual reality, imagine being able to put on your VR goggles and getting the view from the helmet camera of one of the drivers live and being able to look around and see
That would
what
be
he's
cool.
or she is seeing. Like crazy. There's a lot of really cool stuff they can do here.
Yeah.
And maybe Lenovo's that technology provider that enables a lot of this or unlocks a lot of that capability.
Yeah, the drone thing is interesting too, because I mean, in my professional life, I mean, drones are and aerial imagery is a lot of what we do, right? And I mean, the drone technology that's out there nowadays it's just mind blowing. I mean, as a lot of things are now. So I mean, I'd love to see what they're going to do with that. So hey, let's move on to the next one. This is just kind of an FYI thing before we move on to the next story, but Formula One has announced that they're abolishing PCR testing and mask requirement for 2022. And why not? It doesn't seem like it's necessary anywhere else. And it'll be nice to see.
I'll just add
go
on
ahead.
that as well. The reason they're doing that is because vaccination is mandatory for everybody in the paddock. So over the course of the last couple of years, you had to be double PCR tested 96 hours before, 24 hours before. Now it's just straight up. If you're working for a team, if you're part of the media, if you are a driver, you have to be vaccinated. And if you're vaccinated, you're triple vaccinated, you've got your booster, why continue to enforce COVID protocols? The drivers, the employees, they've done what's been asked of them by their local governments, by global governments. Let's move on.
Yeah. So one more quick story here before we head into another break. Flavio Briatore is lined up potentially as an advisor coming back to Formula One. And well, I mean, he's been out of the sport for over a decade, ever since the Crashgate scandal way back in 2009, when Nelson Piquet Jr. said that he'd been ordered deliberately to crash his car at the Singapore Grand Prix to help Fernando Alonso to go on to win that
Mark,
race.
please,
But
please, please, please. I know we've got to go to a break. Can I add something on this?
yeah, please, yeah, go for it.
If your Wikipedia bio has a subsection called convictions and fugitive status, you should not be an employee of Formula One. I will just remind everybody at home. This is an individual who was convicted of multiple counts of fraud in the 80s, received multiple jail sentences, and then fled to St. Thomas in the Virgin Islands to escape time in jail. This is furthermore a guy that was involved in Crashgate when he specifically ordered a driver to crash a car. He was also involved in Spygate the year before. This is a guy who has a very, very colorful history. And I get it. There's going to be some people like, oh, well, you know what? Those prison sentences were overturned and blah, blah, blah because of amnesty. This is a guy who has a very colorful history. And I don't know that this is the guy that you want going to commercial sponsors to sell your sport. I don't think he has a place in Formula One. I think he's toxic, and I don't think he should be involved anymore.
And so, Mark, really tell us how you really feel.
It's a 71-year-old dude. Let's just strip away everything else. It's a 71. It's an like, if are you trying to get fresh or are you trying to relive the hate? Like, where are you going?
Yeah.
Sometimes F1, it's like it's confusing. Also, how on earth did he was partners with both Heidi Klum and Naomi Campbell at some point? That's something to think about.
That's true. Yeah.
Wild.
That's right. Yeah. Yeah, no, it's funny though, but I mean, like Mark says, you know, when you have like that whole section on your Wikipedia bio, let's just say that, you know, you got a bit of a rap sheet. Let's put it that way. Anyways, let's go to a quick break here, guys. We'll be back just a moment, so don't go away. We'll be back shortly. Okay, well, welcome back and moving right along, and we'll get back into winter testing. So Ross Braun, the F1 Managing Director of Motorsport, says that the extreme Mercedes side pod solution that they unveiled at the Bahrain test was not anticipated by the Formula One 2021 rules and regulations. Red Bull is unhappy with the pardon me, the Mercedes upgrade. Yeah, I mean, well, I mean, you know, that's the thing though, right, guys? I mean, if one of these two teams comes out with something a little bit more radical or something that's a bit of departure from the norm compared to everybody else, you know that the other ones are going to be, you know, screaming about it and jumping up and down. And well, I mean, we've seen that story, you know, play itself out over and over again. So what is you know, what do we make of this? Is there something to this? Is this going to go to the scrutineers or whoever's? I guess it's not the scrutineers at this point in the season, but it's interesting. I mean, you know, there's always, like we talk about, room for interpretation in the rules and regs, and that's part of, you know, being an engineer, being a designer in Formula One. Is these are the parameters that you're given. This is what, you know, and you've got to design and build a winning race car around it. So of course they're going to try and exploit every little opportunity that they can. But the question is, where is that line going to be drawn? And where do we think that's going to go from here? Vincenzo, it looks like you want to say something first, so go for it.
Well, I'll speak to just simply the fact that, like, okay, they interpreted the rules one way. We talked about this last episode, that even Adrian Newey's own philosophy, and I'm sure other designers, but I read Newey's book and I understand, you know, his philosophy. It's what are the rules not telling me so that I can push that envelope, right? Like, that's how they think. What is interesting is that this radical change, it's one team making it. And so do you actually have uproar here? Like, we have no idea if it's actually gaining speed. Some rumors that it did well in a wind tunnel. Okay, that's great. But they couldn't figure out porpoising in the wind tunnel. So it's like, it supposedly is supposed to be faster. I don't know. It's like, are we complaining here? Isn't Formula One supposed to be pushing the technological bounds of this stuff?
Great
Like,
point.
isn't that what this sport is all about? To push the boundaries? You know, Ross Braun, okay, it wasn't necessarily the way we thought it would be interpreted. Okay, well, if it was, is it regulation, or is it, this is, I think this is where sometimes black and white needs to come in. Is it within regulation, or is it not? Because if it is, it doesn't matter how they interpreted it, right? Like, it
Yeah.
really, if if interpretation is part of the game, then you have to allow for someone to come out with a bathtub side pod and someone to have no side pod. Like, there has to be that. And I believe that Ferrari and Mercedes have the two vastly different concepts. That's why I'm using those two examples. I heard some folks saying, like, if you look at the Ferrari next to the Mercedes, they look like two completely different vehicles. Like, it is completely different. But that's what it's all about, right? You're hoping to gain advantage by interpreting these rules that you've been set out in such a way to be the fastest car on the grid. Well, how do you do that? If everyone's supposed to be the same, then this isn't Formula One anymore, right? I think that's interesting. I also got some word that, this is again some speculation from some sources. I can't name them, but that Mercedes has been trying to develop two different cars, the one we saw in Bahrain and the one that we saw in Barcelona. The new one is supposed to be like the fix. This is the one that they thought was going to be it, but apparently there might be some balance issues because they did have to move some things around to get that no pod. So they finish out this week, and then if they change the game for next week again, or they have to do something different, because I mean, there was still a lot of porpoising across the board today. I don't know if you guys got a chance to watch it.
Oh yeah.
Including Mercedes.
Yep.
AlphaTauri seemed to have it the worst, but it was across the board. So I think that Mercedes is trying something good for them, because that's what you should be doing. But from what I'm getting, some information, it might be really off.
For the benefit of everyone listening at home, the side pods, and I think probably everyone understands what a side pod looks like and where it is on the car. They have inlet valves that are typically, or inlets that are typically horizontal, and they're designed to capture air to bring into the radiator to cool the power unit. And what Mercedes has basically done is they've lopped off that entire side pod. They've made a tiny inlet valve or inlet that is now vertical, and it's squished up against the side of the car. So there's presumably less cool air coming in, but it looks like they're compensating for that because they have gills along where the side pod would have been. So they have this ability now to cool the engine in a way that they couldn't have before the new regulations. It's understood that Mercedes did share the CAD designs with the FIA, and that they wouldn't have been as confident to go and build this and bring it to the track if they hadn't got the green light from the FIA. So I think Mercedes feels pretty good about it. But this isn't like the double diffuser with Braun back in, I guess, 2000, and off a bunch of victories to begin the season. Like, they've never raced with this, right? This is day one of winter testing, maybe day two by the time people listen to this. And they didn't look great today. They put in a bunch of laps. They weren't super fast, and maybe that was by design. And to Vincenzo's point, they were suffering with the porpoising issue. And of course, this is unrelated, potentially. But it's not like they're winning races with this. So I don't know that there's any need for there to be drama or criticism of this. I'm just excited that teams are continuing to innovate, and I'm excited that the technical regulations allow them to innovate in such a novel way, because I don't think any of us saw this coming.
Yeah, that's interesting. But let's just give a little bit of context to Ross's comments. And he said, "quote I think there's no doubt that the Mercedes concept we didn't anticipate. It's a very extreme interpretation of the regulations, and I think inevitably there's going to be a lot of debate about their interpretation. That's what happens with new regulations. And however hard you tried to close off all the options, and believe me, we closed off hundreds of them. As I say, the innovation is in F1. It's always extreme." So from our perspective, it's largely about, does it affect the objective of the regulations. From the team's perspective, they want to be sure that no one's taken an interpretation that they don't feel is correct. So I think there's going to be a lot of debate in the next few days, end quote. So yeah, I mean, we're talking about it and we're not the only ones, but certainly, I mean, it's not surprising that that Red Bull would immediately start I wouldn't say protesting, but certainly voicing their opinion on it. Red Bull team Horner Red Bull team principal Christian Horner told Auto Motor und Sport in Germany, quote, Mercedes have gone a step too far. That does not correspond with the spirit of their regulations. For us, these wings are illegal. So there you go.
He then backtracked it. He tried to backtrack it, or Red Bull put out a bunch of statements that, he never said this. There was even a segment with Ted Kravitz was asking him on the, Horner walked out and he started talking about it. And he's like, what I'm talking about. And he's like, I have no idea. I don't know. What are they doing? And it was like it was such a facade, but it goes both ways. Like,
sure,
you can't blame Red Bull for they're your biggest rival. Of course you're going to protest it. But at the same time, like, if it's legal, it's legal, and just let it be. What do you guys think about the fact that if enough teams, I forget what it is, either 7 or 8 teams can essentially change the regulation if they all feel like, if I don't know exactly how the process works, but they can essentially vote on a regulation and change it.
Yeah, I think if there was like an issue with any of these things, I mean, I think that we would have like heard a lot more complaining or like a lot more like really, really solid opposition. I mean, say for the things like the porpoising issue, right? I mean, everybody seems to be struggling with that to one degree or another, but it just seems to me that, it's something that's there and we're trying to figure it out and we're going to work it out. It just, I mean, where's that line? Where do they cross that line and say, as a group, we're going to put our foot down that we don't like this and we need to see some change? I don't know. That's a great question. I really don't have an answer for it, Mark. How about you?
Yeah, I feel the same way. And ultimately, right, the rule creation is always going to be a collaboration amongst the teams and the FIA, right? There's nothing about the world of Formula One that is imposed upon the teams. Like, let's remember, the FIA is effectively a contractor that works on behalf of the commercial group Liberty and to a lesser extent the team. So the rules are always going to be a collaborative approach. Of course, Ferrari tends to have a veto on a lot of these things due to their preeminent position in the sport and the value that presumably they bring through financial channels. But we got to remember that the FIA can't just impose things. That the best way to think of them is that they are an external contractor who is hired to run the regulatory side and the safety side of the sport.
Yeah, it's certainly interesting. I mean, this whole, I don't even really know what to call it. This development of this porpoising phenomena is something that I mean, obviously nobody expected it. I'm just surprised that that's turned out to be such a big issue. I would have thought that we would have seen. I expected that we would have seen some solutions by the time that we got to Bahrain. But I mean, the fact that we're still seeing teams struggling with it, and say even like Mercedes, like Vincenzo pointed out, that it's not as a real sort of cut and dry black and white solution that, okay, we just got to do this and this, and then the porpoising thing is going to be solved. So, but I mean,
suspension.
Yeah. Sorry, go ahead, Mark.
I was just going to say, I'll share a couple of my notes and I'm going to pass it over to Vincenzo because he has a great thought that I agree with. But here are my thoughts because I have a couple pages of notes from testing. Porpoising, slightly less porpoising than the shakedown, more porpoising, AlphaTauri. I wouldn't want to drive an AlphaTauri. Mercedes has got porpoising issues. Mercedes looks a little bit slow. Aston Martin looks like they're in big trouble. That car looks like a handful, and Lance and Seb are struggling to drive it in low speed, slow corners. More porpoising. The McLaren floors look a little bit funny. Red Bull, and this was a comment that was shared, I think, on Sky as well, are expected to bring some big upgrades. But I think one of my biggest takeaways today is the drivers across the board are still really struggling to get a hold of these cars. And again, one of the big things to remember too is they're 43 kilograms heavier, and that really changes the dynamic of managing these cars in the corners. And they also have bigger wheels and heavier tire wheel combinations, which means there's more unsprung weight. Like we've only got 2 days of winter testing, and we're in free practice 1 next week on a Grand Prix weekend. And it just looks like some of these teams are really struggling to bring these packages together. So I would that we are going to see some really funky stuff next weekend at Bahrain, and we could see some funny things in the championships coming, or the championship standings coming out of that weekend. Because again, like I look at it, we have 2 days of winter testing left, and some of these teams are still struggling to get a grasp on the porpoising issue. Vincenzo, I know you have a thought on one way they could potentially solve this, but it would really backtrack on the regulations as they're written today.
Right. No, I think that the hydraulic suspension that they made illegal would likely fix the issue, or at least remedy of the issue a lot more than what they can do now. I mean, we talked about this last week. Ground effect, they did away with it after they brought it into the sport, late 70s, early 80s. They did away with it for a reason. And so now it's like, okay, we're back to this again. So sometimes some of these things are just, they feel half-assed backwards. Like what are we, like, why are we not just allow them to fix it? But it does seem like this could be one of those issues that they may want to consider figuring out and adjusting another regulation to help that, because if this is an issue all year, we could have some pretty gnarly crashes. I mean, like, when that ground effect, it will give you a ton of grip, but when it no longer provides grip, which it will when it bottoms out, right? Which I believe the hydraulic suspension could realistically help with the bottoming out piece of it. The minute you bottom out and you lose that grip, if that's in a corner, if that's in anywhere, there's anything you're trying to do, really trying to avoid another car. I'm trying to think of all the situations that could happen, which is pretty much anywhere. And here's the even worse part. It happens under the fastest parts of the track, right? Because the car is building up grip the faster it's going, and then it's happening. I don't know. To me, it seems almost too obvious that could be a safety issue. So, I mean, we'll see. We'll see. Did you guys see in testing, there was some of the cars were jockeying, kind of trying to follow, I think trying to see what that dirty air, how it works. I think they're trying to figure out, like, is it there's got to be a safety element here that we're probably overlooking. I'd be curious to see if that changes before quali or before practice 1 in Bahrain.
It would be interesting, I mean, to see that reintroduction of active suspension onto the cars. I mean, like you said, Vincenzo, I mean, that was banned like 20 years ago. I mean, and Williams were like the pioneers of it. I think Lotus first started developing it back in the 80s. And then Williams perfected it on the, what was it, the FW14B, that dominant car that they had in 91 or 92 or whatever it was. And then, it was banned by the FIA, and it's, it just hasn't seen the light of day in 30 years almost, which is incredible. It's I kind of have mixed feelings on it, but it seems like it was such like a technology that was banned almost because it was ahead of its time. And it's just like, if they banned it way back in the early 90s, what would they have reason to make it legal again or permit it? I don't know, but it certainly is.
I would love to see it, because I'd love to see what these cars are capable of with an active suspension. But I think the debate is, does it make driving too easy for the driver? That's always the debate when you start throwing in these driver aids. But the other piece too is, as it was in the early 90s, it's just going to be cost. And if we're in a world where the teams have agreed that we're going to execute a cost cap of $135 or $140 million a year, adding an active suspension and the nuclear arms race that would happen within the paddock, if you did that, and the associated costs probably just aren't realistic. And I think there'd be a lot of teams that would push back pretty heavily. Again, I would love to see it, because I want to see the peak of a Formula One car, but I just don't think financially it's going to happen.
Yeah. Okay, guys, moving along here. So we're going to get away from the porpoising issue. Actually, let's just take a quick break, and then we can get into a lot of these stories. So we'll do that first, and we'll come back and we'll talk about maybe another box-to-box film project, but not on Netflix. So we'll be back in just a moment to talk about this and a whole lot more. So don't go away. All right, everybody, welcome back to the show. And as I teased before the break, apparently a new Lewis Hamilton F1 documentary is going to be coming to Apple TV Plus very, very soon. The as yet unnamed project will be directed by British filmmaker Matt Kay and produced by Hamilton and his media talent manager Penny Tho. One Community, and yes, Box to Box Films, those people that have brought us 3 and very soon 4 seasons of Drive to Survive. Vincenzo, what's the scoop on this one?
This is a strong play by Apple. I mean, they are producing a couple months ago, they announced that they were doing an F1 film with Brad Pitt that Lewis Hamilton would be somewhat involved with. And now they're going to do this documentary. They're also buying a couple other docuseries, or they're also buying up some other projects along the same, documentary lines. But I think this is interesting because now Apple's like, hey, this Formula One sport that that Netflix company over there seems to be doing really well with, maybe we should get involved. I think anytime you have these major brands wanting to or jockeying for a genre of content, and let's backtrack. Amazon already had a Formula One show.
Yep.
Netflix kind of took that, went balls to the wall with it, turned it into the phenomenon. Does Apple getting involved make it even, like, does it go even bigger? I don't know. I think that Apple's another one of those cultural, Netflix shifts culture. We've seen that with a lot of the content that they have created, right? And Drive to Survive is no different. Apple is another one of those things. Like, I've got 6 Apple devices here in this room, and like they're able to deliver content. Not that Netflix can do the same thing, go right to the phone, but there's something about it being tied directly in with Apple. There's like a production value. There, there's a it lends a little more credence, right? When these credibility, thank you, when these companies get involved with the sport. So it's listen, not a bad thing for F1. Awesome for Lewis Hamilton. I think this will be really good. We talked about Last Dance earlier. These almost like biopic documentary series are. We're going to see a lot more of these as people want to learn more about their heroes, their goats, their whatever you want to call these athletes. Perfect. I think it's an absolute perfect marriage between Apple and Lewis Hamilton. This is a really good spot for them to be in. And Apple TV Plus, they need content. That's the biggest thing they're like missing is they've got Ted Lasso, they've got The Morning Show, they've got a couple pieces, but they don't have the content library. So this makes perfect sense for them to buy into a clearly growing vertical of or genre. Let's say Formula One's the genre, motorsport, and now they've already announced 2 projects that are Formula One related. So we'll get fiction, we'll get nonfiction. Apple wants a piece of the pie, and that's a good thing for everybody, whether it's the drivers, whether it's the teams, whether it's the sport, us, the viewers. I think it's really cool they're using box to box as well. Clearly a group that has worked with Hamilton, around Hamilton, worked with the teams. They'll have tons of footage. They said that there'll be exclusive interviews with, high profile folks. There's going to be footage on and off the track. So that's like, I think the off track stuff is going to be really interesting with Hamilton. But we'll get both of those. So I don't know how the rights work with all that and how Apple worked that out, but they've got the money. We know that. So infusion of cash into this sport is not a bad thing, especially when it's coming from these brands.
Mark, what do you think? Are you looking forward to this project from Apple TV Plus?
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it more than following up Vincenzo when he has analysis like that. I think, one, I'm excited for this. I would question Apple TV's current penetration, right? Like,
Yeah.
Netflix is a cultural phenom and it's a content engine. It's the amount of exclusive stuff that's getting produced from that machine is just unbelievable. Apple TV struggled, and to your point, Ted Lasso, The Morning Show, Tehran, maybe a couple of other pieces that they picked up along the way. They're not charging a lot, and I would suspect that 90% of the people that are actively subscribed are those that got a free subscription with a recent Apple purchase, especially given the fact that people flip their iPhone or their MacBook every couple of years. I think it would be good for them. I don't know that I would sign up for the Lewis doc on its own. Would I sign up for the upcoming feature film with Brad Pitt? Damn right. I would absolutely subscribe to get access to that. So I think combined collectively, yeah, now it becomes a little bit more enticing, and it's going to take Apple a little while, right? Like Disney, they had an absolute library of content to kick off their platform, and then they bought 20th Century Fox and all of their archive to flesh it out. Apple's a little bit different because they got to start building from the ground up. And I think we know eventually everything on Apple will be an Apple exclusive, just as I think we all know that come 5 years from now, everything on Netflix will be a Netflix exclusive, and they won't even bother licensing content from other studios anymore.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. Let's take. Oh, this was an interesting one. So Imola, they've got a new contract. They're going to be on the F1 calendar till at least 2025. This is a track that has a historic link with Formula One, and but has been off the calendar for years and years and years until jumping in last moment to help fill out the pandemic ravaged calendar a couple of years ago, and then made a return last year. You guys happy to see Imola back on this? Well, I guess a permanent fixture in the midterm on for Formula One.
I mean, I am.
Darn right.
I mean, if we could have 4 or 5 races in Italy, I'd be happy. But I love the region. I love that region, Emilia Romagna. It's close to major city. It's close to Bologna. The track is great. Yeah, this is good. This is a good thing. There should be more races. If we get a third race in the United States, I think a country like Italy with the history of the motorsport of this sport specifically deserves more, as do other European and African countries. Like that, they deserve more of the sport. Asian countries should be getting more tracks, but there's only so many races we can race at, and I think Imola is it's one of those good ones that
I'm excited for Imola,
it's awesome.
but I would have been just as excited to see Mugello. And again, I like the way you put it, that the pandemic ravaged 2020 calendar when we still got 17 races in. We got some special stuff.
It's amazing, right?
I feel like Mugello came and went faster than I could even process as and savor. Like, I'm a MotoGP guy, so I know it. I love that track, but I'm happy Imola's on it. Italy is absolutely one of, when you talk about the heartland of motorsports, Italy, the UK, Germany, I love to have 2 races there. I'd be happy to see 3 races there. And I'd love to see a world where, hey, Monza's on the calendar every year, and maybe we alternate between Imola and Mugello. But if Imola's been able to secure a spot on the calendar for the next couple of years, I'm thrilled about that.
Imola's actually closer to Ferrari's headquarters too in Maranello. It's like it's the same region. So that's more of a home race. Like that should probably be on the calendar. I mean, obviously Monza is Monza, but like Imola should be on the calendar. It is that home race for Ferrari. So I'm happy. I mean, that puts a smile on my face. I want to get to that track.
Dude, before we move on, I have to ask you a question, because we did have a listener question specifically about this for you. Kristen wrote in, "Hey, Vincenzo, thanks for showing up on the show. It's been really great. Your Italian accent is perfect. Are you from Italy originally? And do you speak Italian?" So again, every time you pronounce something in Italian, I swoon because it just sounds so authentic and so cool. Do you speak Italian? Are you from Italy originally?
Was not born there. My parents were born there. I'm a first generation Italian American, but we didn't speak English in the house. I actually started grade school not knowing English. So like I learned to read, I learned to speak, write, like all in Italian when I was a kid, when I was, a young boy. And then growing up, it was, both languages. At that age, you learn language pretty quick, but we only spoke Italian in the house. My grandparents didn't speak English. My parents kind of bounced back and forth with what, how they spoke to us. But we listened to Italian music. We did. It was like literally living in the old country, but we just came here. Like that's how we grew up. And then, once you start in school and whatnot, you kind of lose like the accent. But no, speaking Italian was the first language. That's what I spoke. I still speak. I mean, my dialect is heavy Southern Italian from Napoli, but when I'm in Italy, I can kind of turn it on and go back like to a proper Italian. Once in a while, I'll get a little more proper, but speaking to like my aunts and my grandparents when they were alive was always kind of that Southern Italian. Even going back to Italy still, if I'm up north and I let the Napoletana come out, they're like, you're from down south? And I'm like, I'm actually from America. I live in America. And they're like, no, you're from down south. And I was like, no, really, I live in the United States. But yeah, it's cool.
That's very cool.
Yep.
All right.
Thanks, Kristen, for the question. I love it.
So I'm fluent in Dutch. Vincenzo's fluent in Italian, and then Mark, we know you've got some language skills as well.
Yeah, so of all things, because my and it's so funny that you share that story, Vincenzo, because my wife's Persian, and we wanted our son to know Persian. So that's what we speak in the house, and we have since he was born. It's what he speaks with his parents. So that's his first language, because he goes off to daycare. He's speaking English there. So we just reinforce that at home. And hopefully, and my good friend Ahmed from Toronto, he's going to help me start learning a little bit of Arabic as well, because I love that region of the world. But yeah, our first language at home is Persian. And I would love one day to have a Persian F1 podcast, but my language is nowhere near good enough to host a podcast full time.
It's crazy because, it's actually really interesting you say this, and I'd be curious to hear what Daly says. When speaking a language is great, but then using that language in different things. So like there's times where I've been asked, oh, can you do this business? Can you handle like a business conversation? I'm like, not really. Cause the language, like I don't use those words ever. I don't have those types of conversations. Do you feel the same way with Dutch, or do you have business conversations in Dutch?
Not so much anymore, because it was different when I was like living there, because then I was like, I was like, it was there for business and pleasure, right? So I was living and working there. So there'd be the way that I'd be talking to my grandparents or my cousins or my friends, and then I'd be at work, and then you've got like technical things you have to say, or you have to write a report, or you have to write an email to somebody. But nowadays it's just, it's like texting my friends or my cousins or whatever, and then talking to somebody on the phone, or going to visit, and we're all going out for dinner or whatever.
Yeah.
And so like, it's one of those things. I don't write as much as I obviously used to. So it's a little bit kind of tricky that way. It's like one of those things, right? You either use it or you lose it, right?
Right.
Yeah.
And then you end up using it in one kind of like, you carve out this one way that you're using it, talking to family, talking about personal stuff. But then when you got to switch over to something else, sometimes it's a little, that's just the nature of the beast, right? Where this podcast is English. I do a lot of my business in English. So it's,
exactly.
It is what it is. But yeah. One day, maybe when after the baby's born and we'll get to Italy a little bit more often, I want her to be able to speak Italian.
Yeah, that'd be awesome.
One thing actually, it probably won't be as big an issue for you because you are fluent in Italian. My son, who's 4, his Persian is so much better than mine. But when he's frustrated with me, or he just wants to talk the S word about me to my wife, his mom, he'll speak in Persian really quickly, and I don't understand what he's saying. But he throws shade at me in Persian to his mom, my wife, because he knows he can. And I'll pick up a couple of words of like, "You son of a gun." I know exactly what you're saying, but.
He's my new favorite person in the whole world.
That's awesome.
If he rags on you, Hamilton, then I love it.
Oh, endlessly, my friend, endless.
Okay, guys, let's talk about, like, we got one more story here, and then it's time to wrap it up for another week. So Aston Martin are apparently evaluating developing their own power unit for 2026. So they're looking at the viability of creating their own engine once the new engine regulations are introduced. We don't know when that's going to happen, but technical director Andrew Green said that they're looking into going it on their own, developing their own engine. He had the following to say, quote, "I think going forward with our ambitions, we're definitely investigating our own power supply, our power unit supply in the long term. 2026 is mooted as a new power unit regulation, and I think as a team, we'd love to be involved. We have Aramco now involved as a sponsor. I think conversations going forward in the next years, we'll see. For sure, we'll be looking at it in great detail and understanding whether there is a benefit to it in that direction," end quote. So, guys, what do you think?
This
Do
is
you think that?
it's
Sorry, go
super.
ahead.
Yeah, no, this is an interesting topic because I think it's important to understand that there is a linkage between the Aston Martin road car division and the F1 team, right? Like Lawrence
Yeah.
Stroll came in with a group that gobbled up 25% of the road car team and or the road car side of the business, and he's now the chairman. But it's really important to understand that in a way, Aston Martin is very much a boutique supercar producer. They source almost all of their gearboxes, engines, and electronics for the road cars from Mercedes. They're rocking the AMG 4-liter V8 and the Vantage, the DB11, and the DBX. Their entire lineup is flush with components and electronics from Mercedes cars. And
Mhm.
Mercedes is a strategic investor in the Aston Martin road car division. So to me, it would be very, very interesting if Aston Martin did. They've got time, and there's absolutely no harm in exploring this. But the question has to be, is it worth a $500 or $500 million investment to build the
Mhm.
capability to develop our own F1 engine with no guarantee that it's going to be any better than the power units that are being fed to us by Mercedes, who coincidentally also feeds power units into our road car division? So I think they've got time. I think it's the right thing to do. The whole intention of the 2026 power unit regulation changes is to make it simpler. I just don't know that this is where you want to be spending your resources. If you're Aston Martin, there's so many other things you could be doing. But then again, if the formula continues to simplify when we talk about the aerodynamics and things like that, and you know what, we know that there's wild variations out there, but over the next couple of years, teams will consolidate down to a more standardized design of cars as they all learn
Yeah.
the same thing. Maybe then, like, hey, we don't have a lot else to learn here. Let's throw some money at a power unit project. But I don't think it necessarily makes sense. Vincenzo,
Yeah.
Mark, what do you guys think?
Yeah, it's kind of interesting because I think that for me, it almost seems a little bit, I would say, putting the cart in front of the horse, but I would think that, they haven't quite nailed it yet with their car. I mean, last year was obviously a miss. This year is still to be determined whether or not they get it right with the car that they're going to field this year for 2022. I know they're ambitious, but I would concentrate a little bit more on the car first. But I guess the thing is that if you're going to get in at the same time as everybody else, because we saw with Honda that if you wait a couple of years compared to everybody else, then that's maybe not the best thing either. I guess ultimately it comes down to the fact, does Lawrence Stroll want to cut that check and fund an engine development program within that team, or is he just happy to say a customer of Mercedes? But yeah, I don't know. It's Vincenzo. What are your thoughts? Oh, Vincenzo, I think you're muted, buddy.
Oh, sorry, having some audio issues.
You,
Should be
you
fixed
brought
now.
you brought up Stroll, and
Yeah.
you wonder if, like, is it an ego thing? Is it this, like, just for the sake of ego? And I understand, the engine, like the power units are going to change, but you're
Yeah.
still in bed, so to speak, with the 8-time champion power unit, essentially. Um, I say, why change it? And to your point, Daly, you've got the best power unit. You're starting with the best power unit on the grid. Now, whatever you're doing to it, obviously, is not
Totally.
helping, but you still have the best power unit. If you're not able to to translate that into winning,
Mm-hmm.
do you want to spend that kind of money and at the level of investment, research and development, employees, right? You have to hire people now to like, that's a whole different, unless it's something they want to do for the road cars. and then just have one, you know, like they want to be able to kind of like do it for both road and
Shared
race cars,
resources. Yeah.
share
Yeah.
resources, fine. But yeah, I don't know. It's kind of one of those I'll believe it when I see it type stories.
Sure.
I want, you know, is there something else? Again, we know politics rules everything. Is there some other political thing going on behind the scenes, you know, with Mercedes and Aston Martin? But yeah, my take is, hey, if you can't figure it out right this moment with the power unit you have, it's not going to get any easier when you're trying to build your own power unit as well as figure everything else out. So
Yeah. Totally.
yeah.
Yeah. Well, guys, it's been some great insight, some great discussion tonight. I think there's a good place to park it for another week before we shut it down here and turn off the lights for another night. Vincenzo, just remind everybody where they can find you online.
Just go follow me over on Twitter at Vincenzo Landino on the
Awesome.
tweet.
And we are at Scuderia F1 Pod. And you can also email us with any questions or comments at scuderiaf1pod@gmail.com. And that's it, guys. That's a wrap. On behalf of myself, Mr. Mark Hamilton, and Mr. Vincenzo Landino, thank you for listening. Thank you for watching. Have a great weekend. Enjoy the latest drop of Drive to Survive. And we'll be back again very, very soon. Bye for now. 2 hours. That's right. All right, guys. Take care. Talk to you soon.